Welcome to the Teen Life Podcast, where we believe that teenagers are not a problem to be solved, but we are here to help you equip teenagers through the power of connection. Hey guys, this is Chris Robey, and I am working through with you guys this incredible series on diverse families. And the reason we did this was just because we know that teenagers all come from families that look different than maybe where we came from. Whether it depends on our ethnicity or our cultural backgrounds, or just really depending on where we grew up. And today's episode is just about that. It's just about the experience of a family who identifies as multiracial and multicultural. That's a really exciting conversation to have that I've just had with Tquan Moore and Leahanna Moore. And they share their experience as being both multi-ethnic and multicultural, and all of the different opportunities and challenges that that brings for not only them as a husband and wife, but also with their children, and the experience of their children being both multi-ethnic and multiracial children. I love this conversation with them, their openness or honesty about their experience and what it is that they're experiencing. And they have some great insight on what it means to be parents of multiracial, multi-ethnic children, and all the really cool things that come with that, but also just some ways that we can engage better with the way we ask questions, the way that we're curious. One of my big takeaways of this is just the way we ask makes a big difference, and you'll really hear a lot of that in this episode. So join in with me as we continue this conversation around diverse families with Tquan and Leahanna Moore. Glad to have you guys with us today. I've got Tquan and Leahanna Moore with us, yep. And we are here to talk about this whole series is about diverse families and the different kind of families that the Lord presents us with. And so we're really glad to have you guys here today. And Tquan and Leahanna are here to talk about interracial, multicultural families and their experience with that. So welcome, guys.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So if you guys would kind of, for the audience, how would you describe your family situation based upon kind of how we got that started?
Okay. You want me to go first? You want to go first?
You go first.
Okay. That's where that typically plays out. That's
right.
I'll go first. Well, we're a multiracial family. I'm African American. My wife is white and Hispanic mix.
I can go into that a little more, yes.
Yeah, okay.
That's the nutshell.
And so our children have a mix of African American, white, and Hispanic in them.
All right.
And so you can check all the boxes when it comes to, where they say, are you this or that? He's like, yep. Let me just click them all off. And so, but we're multiracial. I think my wife, because she has grown up overseas, and I'll let her talk more about that, brings in a more multicultural aspect. But most of us in the family, we're like United States bound. This is the culture that we've been in for the majority of our lives. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, Leahanna, you want to talk about the multicultural aspect of your family?
Sure. I was born here in the United States. My mother is Mexican, born and raised in Mexico, married and then lived in the States. My dad was from the States, Kansas, farm living. Mm-hmm. They decided to be missionaries in Argentina. So when I was a year and a half old, our family moved to Argentina. I lived there for 11 years. So there are components of multicultural, things in our family, just my raising up, growing up years. Mm-hmm. So I bring that with me, but in kind of dividing things out a little bit more, the culture that you find in Mexico that my mom brought with her and the culture that you find in Argentina, although both Latin are different, to add to that, my father's ancestry is heavily influenced by German ancestry.
Gotcha.
My maiden name is Rogendorf. So there's a lot of, German influence that he brought. He never lived in Germany, and his parents never did, but it was just kind of passed down. And so, I brought that with me to Argentina. Well, my parents did. I grew up in Argentina, my very, very formative years. Have mostly Argentine friends there, and then moved to Texas, the rest of my growing up years until we went off to college. So, yes, there are different cultures all mixed in there. And I think there's the big picture of what a culture is, and then you can really divide things down into more specific ways that people practice their culture. And even though, Tquan just said, family here is very United States bound, you see culture with the region, with the race, with just upbringing, what you were doing or what you were not doing.
Right,
So
right.
there's a lot of components to a culture.
Yeah, so definition of multicultural, that's awesome.
It can go all kinds of different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Well, thank y'all for kind of painting that picture for us of your family experience. And so with that, how do you parent in the midst of being a multiracial and multicultural family? And I don't know if that's intentional on, if there's intentional decisions you guys make as parents, or if that is something that you figure out along the way, like sometimes other situations parenthood is. But how do you parent in the midst of being a multicultural, multiracial family?
I think that acknowledging the cultures that are present is important. And just seeing how members of the family react to that acknowledgement. For example, the culture that I brought with me from Argentina was close to my heart as a kid. I've known of other MKs, missionary kids, that have brought, they came to the States and wanted to reject anything that they came with. It was just a sore point for whatever reasons. Things change, of course, throughout the years, but you kind of want to know how that person, whether your child or your spouse, associates with that culture, and being sensitive, acknowledging it first, knowing that it's there, part of their life, and just seeing how the reaction is. The culture of Gen X versus millennial. There are some millennials that don't want to be associated with the traits that are generally, associated with them. Gen Xers, same, all the different cultures of a generation. And so, you just acknowledge this is where you're at. This is what's part of you. Learn from it, or as I've been, learning, chew and spit, so to speak. Take it, spit out what you don't want.
Right.
And take what's good and wise.
Right.
Yeah. Those are all good, because especially when you bring as many different levels in it as we do. And I think actually everybody's got these levels of multiculturalism in their families if they understand the definition of it, like you said. But I think primarily as we raise our children, we want to make sure that their identity is in the Lord first and foremost. That He's the one setting telling them who they are and who they're supposed to be. Because with any culture, you have pros and cons about whatever way that culture's going. And so, and I think also when you have in our society where race is a big cultural marker, or we'll just go with the race one. Race is a big cultural marker when you're them, and if you need to try to figure out, so what am I? Because that's one of the big questions people are asking. So are you black? Are you white? Are you Hispanic? Right? And so for them, the answer is yes. And so to be able to, sometimes it feels good to go, oh yeah, I can say I am this and feel like, okay, I've got my identity, right? But when you have for our kids, all three of those, then it's like, well, yes, I'm that. So what does that mean if I'm black and I'm white, right? Because those cultures are often at odds with things, but I'm Hispanic too, but I don't speak Spanish and I don't look white. They might think I'm Hispanic. You see what I'm saying? And so,
absolutely.
So because they're taking all these on and kind of going, as Leahanna said, taking in, what's good from those cultures that I am connected to biologically, and going, okay, I can take this in, but man, that's not so good. And how you determine that, I would say, is if there are identities in the Lord who created us. I know everybody doesn't believe that per se,
right.
But for our family, I feel like that's the identity that doesn't waver, it doesn't shift. And so if you have that anchoring point, then and that's leading the way and helping you decide, as I take into a culture that I have through family or through location, region, then I can go, okay, these are the things in that culture that that fall in line with my central identity of Christ, and I can hold on to those. I can parade those. I can, cheer those on. I can support those. And then there's others you're like, I don't think that's so good. So because of what God tells me about who I'm supposed to be,
right,
over what the culture has to say.
So with your kids, when you talk about them being in each one of these categories, isn't the right word, but black, white, Hispanic, when they talk to you guys about sharing that with their friends or their peers, how is that accepted in their circles? You get what I'm asking? Like is there pushback on that? Is there questions? Are there or is there acceptance of your children's multiracial identities as it comes to saying yes to maybe all three, right? How does that typically go for them, and then how does that conversation go with you guys?
I'm not exactly sure all the deets on how my kids, as they're interact, because they're kids and we're their parents, and so sometimes they talk to us, sometimes they don't. Right.
Yeah.
And when they talk to you, you get a certain perspective. So I'm gonna throw that out there before I say anything.
Yeah.
But the general sense, at least where we live, I don't think that their peers have a hard time accepting that they've got mixed parents or all of that's in them. Now, I do know that I think that their friends will, because of cultural ideologies, cultural things that are just kind of out there that you kind of soak in as you go on, jokes and those kind of things. Those kind of things pop up, and I don't think it's out of a lack of acceptance or anything like that. It's kind of just the soup of the waters of the culture that we swim in, and so the jokes will fly. And so when it hits our kids, they have to figure out, how do I navigate that, and so forth from a peer perspective. I don't know. You may have some different, Leahanna. You may have some differing thoughts because, they tend to talk to you a good bit. So as well, me too.
Yeah.
But they talk to mom about different things.
Right.
I talk to dad.
Yes. I get that.
Each one has been different. I've asked them, at school, how are you treated? Basically, I'll start with my oldest. She and I last summer went to Dominican Republic on mission trip together, and Dominican Republic is just a bunch of my kids. It's just, there are a lot of black and white mix and Hispanic. it's just amazing. She said, "Mom, I've never felt more at home than in this country, just because of looks." Now, the language barrier was a whole other thing. She was like, "I can't communicate with anybody." I mean, it's very limited. And, but she was like, just walking down the street, I'm just another Dominican here. And she was like, it was lovely. I've just felt so comfortable. I know I've talked to my middle one, and she said she's really not felt any discrimination necessarily based on her looks. That, you know, it's really, she's not encountered too much of it that she's mentioned. My third one, he says he definitely feels that he's one of the only black kids in school, which I know that's not true, but that's his perception is what I'm getting. And maybe in his class or something like that, you know, but it's not, I don't sense that it has been a negative perception. He just realizes the difference. And everything is subject to making a joke and a laugh. He is our comedian of the family.
That's true.
So, you know, he'll very, very honestly just make a joke and, you know, carry on. And I don't, you know, I've always wondered, you know, are you covering up for, you know, a hurt or something? But I really don't think so. He's just taking a shot at something, you know, it's an open door for him to make a joke. So I don't sense that they have had negative effects from it, but they do know it for sure. It's blatant, and they realize it. We used to live in Houston. We lived there for 20 years. All three of our kids were born there. And they had, our youngest was not old enough for school when we, I know he did kindergarten there, but the girls went some through school, and we lived in a neighborhood that was vastly diverse. It was just amazing. You know, Houston in general is very international city. Our neighborhood had the UN kind of represented there. So they noticed that. They were like, I miss seeing a variety of people. I miss, you know, not necessarily being in all those cultures, but just being around them. And so they have an appreciation for it. Not just black versus white, but just all the different kinds of people you can come across.
Right.
So, but I think it's more of just a keen awareness and sensitivity to it, but I don't perceive it being a negative thing in their lives right now.
Yeah, I would also add, because like you said, our move from Houston to here was very different. And so just recently, I had my son and a couple of his friends he's been hanging out with at church, and both of them are black. And so 3 boys went, and we did some fun stuff together. But on the way back, and I did that intentionally as well, because it's not been, at least in our church, in our neighborhood, there's just not a lot of students that we are connected to that look like him. Okay, and so I thought, we'll just go. He doesn't get this opportunity very often. And as a black dad going, man, I want him to have black friends, though we live in mostly white suburbia now. Okay. And so so we go, and I'm driving them back, and then they start talking about their hair, okay, and the different ways and things that they would do with it. And I'm just being a fly on the wall, driving the car, and I realized, man, I don't know that he's had that opportunity to talk with some guys who have the same kind of hair experience as him, and so I don't think they saw it as anything except for we were talking about hair. But for me, I went, okay, there's a mutual connection that I've never heard him have with anybody else, because I wanted to connect him with some people that looked like him. and had some of the same upbringing. Can't say it's all the same, but some similarities.
Right. Well, and I think you guys really outlined just how much personality, experience, all those different things play into how your children might be affected or not by your family and the way that your family comes into the world. And so I think that's really, I think sometimes we think that's like a ubiquitous, everyone's going to experience it the same way. And I don't think it doesn't sound like it really happens that way. So with that, what do you wish people around you knew about your family?
That's a great question. I don't know. I'm always hoping that people know that we are flawed. Mm-hmm. We definitely fall under we've all fallen short of the grace of God, and we strive to do better. Mm-hmm. I know I'm reminded with your mentioning of hair, Tquan, when my girls were little, I did not do their hair right. I know this. I did not. And hair is a huge deal for a little bitty girl. And that's a deal, So I cannot say that we've done things great or, the due diligence that it needed. We've done what we had the tools and resources to do at the time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really kind of the grace that everybody needs to remember about themselves, mm-hmm. is you do what you know to do at the time and take every opportunity to learn mm-hmm. more for next time. And so, I kind of have this thought always in my mind. If I go out in the grocery store and they see me with 3 kids that don't look like me, I'm like, man, I did all the work here and they don't look like me. They all look like Tquan and they're beautiful, but dang it. And they all, the questions, I can see the wheels turning in their heads. They're like, who's this lady? Mm-hmm. And who did their hair? This was when they were little. Right. The girls do a magnificent job of their own hair now. But, it's kind of a self-judging thing. I just didn't do this right. I don't know. And am I exposing my kids to the right things or the wrong things or at the right time? I don't know. And that really spans throughout just parenting, period. But in this topic, it's the same. You do what you can do and what you know to do at the time.
Right.
And give yourself grace. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I would say I love people to know that you bring assumptions with you when you meet people. And if you're aware of that, I'm not even saying necessarily throw all of them out, but because we all bring some assumptions to the table when we meet people. If I go to Walmart here and I see somebody who looks like me, often I would go, oh, they're probably speaking English. But then they may jump off and speak something else. I'm like, oh, I was not expecting that because they look like me, maybe, dressed like me somewhat. And I'm like, okay. And so because we bring those assumptions, when we are meeting people, we need to know, okay, I've brought these things with me, but this is a person that my assumptions may or may not be true. Mm-hmm. And so if I take the time to listen and let them speak and to get to know them, then I will see who they are, at least who they're trying to reveal they are. They could be snowing us if they wanted, but I would get to find out about them because they will begin revealing that to me. Right. And so some of my assumptions will fall off, like, oh, yeah, that's not what I thought. And then some of them will be like, okay, that was kind of close. And then there will be things that are like, wow, that's brand new. I never would have even thought of that. Mm-hmm. And so just taking the time to listen and not assume within a few moments because you see somebody or or you kind of know where they live or their job, you got them. So just listen first, because they'll let you know who they are.
So just kind of boiling this down a little bit even more to y'all's experience, because I mean, I've got a question here that basically the question is, how can we love and support teenagers of families like yours? But I think it might be more powerful to hear what's the best way that people around your kids can support them, being multiracial, multi-ethnic family, and you know, what if you were to talk to the people around you and say, this is how you best support our kids and their experience, what would that answer be? So I feel like that could be really helpful for anyone who has a similar experience, and how would I best support a kid who maybe comes from several different backgrounds, and maybe my family isn't, because I'll speak for myself. My family doesn't necessarily come from multi backgrounds, and so that's the experience I don't have. Mm-hmm. So, like you said, Tquan, I don't want to make assumptions, right? Mm-hmm. And so, how do we best support? Let's just think about your kids.
Well, that's the question itself is huge, because like that shows a concern already. Mm-hmm. I that's the quickest way to my heart is if somebody wants to take care of my kids and love on them. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the ultimate sign of love. Right. But to really answer the question, I would say first and foremost, direct them to God every time. Mm-hmm. And really that doesn't have anything to do with your culture or race. But going back to what Tquan was saying, your identity is the foundation, should be Christ. Everything else can be built upon that. And so whatever it is that someone speaks into my kids, I want it to be absolutely infused with Christ-likeness, mm-hmm. and an example, just saying, hey, I've gone through this, or I'm going through this, or I know this is probably a good thing to help you with what you're going through. So that would be the very first thing for helping or ministering to my kids culturally or racially is really acknowledging and, not necessarily putting on display their race or culture, but acknowledging it as if you're acknowledging that they run fast or whatever other characteristic that is seen. A lot of times people kind of shy away and don't have the vocabulary to say, I noticed you're mixed. The question, what are you, is posed to my kids a lot. And so maybe a different vocabulary is healthier. Like, do you know what race or culture your mom and dad are? Mm-hmm. How did you grow up? Where did you grow up? Mm-hmm. Things that can give you a clue and point toward what you see externally. Say, I noticed you have beautiful olive skin. However, your eyes are a much lighter, like honey green. Mm-hmm. That's a great combination. It's rare. Tell me about that. Mm-hmm. Kind
of leaning on observations. And,
yeah.
I'm seeing this. Help me.
Yeah. Exactly. That's something that my kids have told me point blank. People ask me, what are you? I'm like, well, not a rock, not a plant, uh-huh. not a food. So uh-huh. What are you?
Right.
So, the category becomes a little bit more of a human approach. And so, but at the same time, not shying away, but really coming up to it, and they would love to talk about themselves. Who doesn't want to talk about themselves? Right. So that's just very helpful to have that kind of approach to a conversation about them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Those are really good. I would say defer judgment. Defer judgment. I think a lot of times we see circumstances and feel like we know how somebody got there or what the story is or can imagine it. And we need to put that aside and see the person who's created in the image of God. His image is stamped on them, no matter what their skin or eyes look like or anything like that. And I would also say, try to embrace diversity. I think oftentimes that question of what are you is more for us to be able to categorize things and feel comfortable that we know where things fit in life, right? As opposed to really going, man, this person brings something different. And if they are created in the image of God, then there's something about that difference that I can learn about them that may end up teaching me something about God that I didn't know.
Right, yeah.
And so, but we tend to, when we see something different, we just want to categorize and put it in a box as opposed to embrace it and go, man, what can I glean from it? You know, what is this? And if we all did that, we'd have all this mutual, this reciprocal learning and engaging from each other, because you're different than me, Chris, and Leanna's different than me. And so as we embrace these things and see how God has made us, then we all kind of get enlightened and built up and encouraged, as opposed to categorized and cornered and judged and put in our place.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah, there really is beauty in diversity. It's just such a much richer life, I think.
Absolutely. I think you guys are obviously living testaments to that, and with your children and their experience, and you guys being intentional with communicating where they come from and their culture and their heritage, and Tquan, like you said, with your son, intentionally putting him with young men who might have similar hair. That's not something that I would have thought a whole lot about. And so it sounds like there's a lot of intentional parenting, but also to a lot of thoughtfulness when it comes to how you guys raise your children and encourage your community to engage with your kids. Because I think the way we ask these questions is really important, right? So I can come up and say, "What are you?" Well, that would probably offend, or not offend, but just kind of take back anyone. Like, how am I supposed to answer that question?
That's what I am.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I can answer that a lot of different ways that aren't helpful. Right. And so, guys, this has been just incredibly helpful, and I hope it's been a blessing for you, and I know for our audience as we're trying to be the best helpers of students that we can be. Yeah. It's great to hear your experience. Anything else you'll want to add in before we wrap up?
I just want to thank those people that you guys work with who are listening to this, and you're out and you're engaging with students and so forth who may come from very different backgrounds than you. It's not easy. And so I just want to say thank you, because it matters, like, more than you know. And you may not see the ripple effect of it until a decade or two later, but I'm telling you, it matters. And so thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a high calling, I think, because it's easy to love my own people. They're my children. I think it's definitely the extra mile to get outside of your family and seek kids that need ministering to. That's for sure the extra mile or
Absolutely.
two.
Well, Tquan and Leahanna, thank you so much for being here and jumping in for this great conversation.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it. Okay,
thank you all so much for that great conversation. Tquan and Leahanna, and for the great things we got to learn. If this was a great episode for you, something that you feel like you could share within your circles, be sure that you subscribe to the Teen Life Podcast, follow us on social media channels, and you can text this episode to a friend if this was something that was meaningful for you, or if you know someone who has a similar situation or maybe even similar questions that you have. Review us on your favorite podcast app. Let people know that this is a great resource for you. Join us next week as we continue our Diverse Family series, and we will see you next time.